Right, so European buyers acquiring goods that have been manufactured with child labour
Right.
in Cambodia.
Correct, and under conditions which are extremely exploitative, to say the least.
The only difference between working in a garment factory and working in a brothel is that there's very little chance of catching AIDS in a garment factory. And I realise now that 50% of the prostitutes in Phil Cork, the brothel area that I've been filming in, are HIV positive. 50% of the girls in this particular brothel are HIV positive. 50% of the girls that seem to be enjoying their lives as prostitutes are HIV positive, will develop AIDS, will die of AIDS, and before they die, they'll pass AIDS on to the young men that visit them. These young men will pass the virus on to their wives and possibly on to their children. And although I'd become very cynical about the many reports that I'd read while I was in Cambodia, there was one that I was not at all cynical about, which predicted that more Cambodians would die of AIDS than were killed during the genocidal reign of Pol Pot. And it was my fear that Shreng might die of AIDS, because she'd only been working in the brothel for 1 month at this point, that made me want to help her. I asked her if she would like to leave the brothel, and she said yes, she would appreciate it if I did help her, but then I'd have to talk to the pimp. The pimp was not at the brothel that night. He was out of town for a few days. I promised that I would come back and talk to him. So I discovered that there's lots of different ways in which young girls can wind up in a brothel. Sometimes they're sold into prostitution by their parents because the parents are very poor. Sometimes girls are sold into prostitution so the parents can have access to consumer goods. Sometimes young girls are stolen by a neighbour, by someone in the village, or in one instance by a policeman. I'd come down to one of the poorest areas in Phnom Penh looking for one girl who was working in a brothel that I'd heard about. Her name was Minette. She was 13 years old.
All right.
So too young. Oh, they're going.
How long ago was it that she was stolen by the policeman?
More than 1 year from a water possible last year. She afraid because she has a big gun and she put on her neck.
The policeman put a gun to her neck?
Yeah.
And what did he say to her?
She decided to go to prostitute. And her brother say after she is a prostitute, she nearly crazy. She can't stop working this work by she has enough money to return back to the commercial sexual worker.
How much must she pay to the owner of the brothel?
$200. She must pay, yeah. She must return back to her.
How long will it take her to earn $200 working as a prostitute?
No limit the time.
So maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah. It's up to the boss, not to her. She said that it's so hard to her, too difficult to her to live.
Close to the end of my interview with Minette, a friend of hers turned up who worked in the same brothel as she did. She'd also been stolen. Is this girl from the countryside?
Yeah, come from the countryside.
How long ago did she see her parents? I discovered that I could have bought each of these girls for $200. For $400 I could have released both of these girls from their bond to the pimp. But I realised that in a country where it isn't possible to go to the police to get protection, that if I was to pay $400 to release these girls, 2 other girls would very quickly be stolen and take their place. But in actual fact, I would become part of the trafficking problem, not part of the solution. It might make me feel good about myself to help these girls. In the same way, I now realise that it might make me feel good about myself to help Shreng leave the brothel, but all I would be doing would be opening up a space for another girl who I didn't know, who I would never know, and who I would never meet, to be stolen or sold into prostitution and to be exposed to the HIV virus in the same way that Shreng was. There are laws in Cambodia which prohibit child prostitution, which prohibit the trafficking of children. But whilst the police are regular visitors to the brothel areas in and around Phnom Penh, they are not there to protect the girls from sexual exploitation, and they are not there to arrest the young men that have sex with these girls. But then there are laws also which prohibit the cutting and export of the remainder of Cambodia's hardwood forests. But these laws are not administered either. If the Cambodian government follows through on the contracts it's entered into with overseas logging companies, the ecological devastation that will result will force tens of thousands of people off the land and into Phnom Penh in search of work. Many of the young women who will not be able to find work will wind up working in brothels. I realise now that helping Shreng leave the brothel was not a long-term solution to the problem of child prostitution. But I had made a promise to Shreng, and even though I had some misgivings, I did go back to the brothel a few days later to talk to the pimp. Shreng was excited to see me. The mama-san was less than excited to see me. The pimp wouldn't talk to me and seemed to be under the influence of some kind of drug. A few minutes later, the mama-san said something to Shreng, and her attitude towards me changed. She became cool, she became distant, and she didn't want me to film her anymore. And then the mama-san looked at me in a way that made it quite clear I was no longer welcome, and I left. I was a bit confused now as to what Shreng wanted or expected from me. Did she want me to help her or did she not want me to help her? It occurred to me that perhaps the mama-san had got wind of the fact that I was going to try and help get Shreng out of the brothel. Maybe she thought that I was going to steal Shreng. Maybe she thought that I was going to go to the police. Maybe she thought that as a filmmaker I was going to expose the brothel as a place that employed underage girls. I don't know. So I asked a young Khmer man that I'd met by the name of Tia if he would go to the brothel. I gave him a little bit of money. If he'd take Shreng aside, take her into her room and ask her if she wanted me to help her or if she wanted to stay in the brothel. Because it occurred to me that perhaps working in the brothel was the best alternative available to Shreng. Perhaps she couldn't go back to her family. Perhaps she couldn't go back to the village. So